The first time Sarah saw him, she thought the moonlight itself had bled into a living shadow. One moment, the overgrown garden behind her inherited Victorian cottage was empty, silvered by the full moon's glow. The next, he was simply there, perched impossibly still on the crumbling stone wall like a statue carved from obsidian and starlight. A jet-black cat, so profoundly dark he seemed to absorb the light around him, his eyes two unwavering pools of liquid gold fixed directly on her bedroom window. Sarah's breath hitched, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool October air tracing her spine. She blinked, rubbed her tired eyes, and when she looked again, the wall was empty. Only the rustling leaves and the sigh of the wind remained. Had she imagined it? A trick of the late hour and the weight of sorting through her late grandmother's dusty, memory-choked belongings? But the image, the sheer presence of that silent, watching cat burned behind her eyelids long after she pulled the curtains closed, leaving her unsettled and strangely awake. Over the next month, the relentless task of clearing the old cottage consumed Sarah. Boxes filled with yellowed photographs, brittle lace, and forgotten trinkets seemed to exhale the scent of dried roses and dust, each object whispering fragments of a childhood spent here, summers filled with sunlight and the comforting hum of Grandma Alara's voice. Yet, a specific memory remained frustratingly elusive, a dark smudge on an otherwise bright canvas. She felt its absence like a phantom limb, especially when she handled a particular faded velvet ribbon tucked inside a tattered book of fairy tales. The ribbon felt familiar, charged with a forgotten emotion she couldn't name. The next full moon rose, fat and heavy in the ink-black sky, painting the neglected garden in stark monochrome. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, Sarah stood, again at her window, and there he was, the jet-black cat, materialized as silently as before, sitting regally on the same spot on the wall. This time, he didn't vanish. He tilted his head, those luminous gold eyes locking onto hers with unnerving intelligence. Then deliberately, he rose, stretched, with languid grace and jumped down into the tangled weeds disappearing from view. A strange compulsion seized Sarah. She grabbed her grandmother's old, thick cardigan, slipped on boots, and stepped out into the cool, silent night. The garden was a forgotten kingdom, wild and overgrown. Moonbeams struggled through the canopy of ancient oaks, dappling the path in shifting silver patterns. Sarah moved cautiously, the crunch of frost-kissed leaves loud in the stillness. "Hello?" she whispered, feeling foolish. "Kitty?" A soft rustle came from a dense thicket of overgrown roses near the back fence, where the garden blurred into the encroaching woods. She pushed aside thorny branches, wincing as one snagged her sleeve. And there he was, not perched, but lying low in the damp earth beneath the thicket's shelter. The moonlight caught him fully now, revealing what distance had hidden before. His sleek black fur was matted with mud on one side. More alarming was the way he held his left front paw, curled protectively against his chest, not touching the ground. A dark stain glistened on the fur near his shoulder. He wasn't just mysterious, he was hurt. Sarah's breath caught, the initial unease instantly replaced by a surge of protective concern. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured softly, kneeling slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening. "What happened to you?" The cat didn't flee. He watched her, those golden eyes wide and unblinking, filled with a depth that felt ancient and knowing. He let out a low, soft chirrup, a sound that vibrated with something more than feline need. It felt like an appeal, a plea laced with an urgency that prickled Sarah's skin. It was then she noticed the faint scent cutting through the damp. Earth and decaying leaves, not roses, but something sharper, medicinal, like old liniment. a scent that tugged violently at the edges of that stubborn, hidden memory. Her grandmother's hands smelling of herbs and liniment, bandaging a skinned knee. But where? When? Okay, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with a sudden, inexplicable lump in her throat. Let me help you. She slowly extended a hand, palm down. The cat didn't recoil. He sniffed her fingers cautiously, his cool nose brushing her skin. Then, with a soft sigh that seemed to deflate his small frame, he nudged her hand weakly with his head. The trust offered by this wild, moon-summoned creature was staggering. Sarah carefully scooped her arms beneath him, mindful of his injured leg. He felt surprisingly light, a bundle of tense muscle and silken fur. He tucked his head against her chest, a faint rumbling purr starting deep within him, a vibration she felt more than heard. Holding him close, enveloped in the scent of damp fur, night air, and that haunting trace of liniment, Sarah turned to carry him back towards the cottage's warm light and the promise of safety. The forgotten ribbon, the scent, the cat's sudden appearance. Threads were tangling, pulling at something buried deep. Just as she cleared the rose thicket, the cat suddenly stiffened in her arms. His purr cut off abruptly. His head snapped up, ears swiveling like radar dishes, pointed not towards the woods, but towards the far corner of the rambling property, where the silhouette of a dilapidated, ivy-choked barn hunched against the moonlit sky. A low growl, unlike anything Sarah expected from this injured creature, rumbled in his chest. It was a sound of pure warning. Following his intense gaze, Sarah squinted. Was that movement? Near the barn's sagging door? A shadow darker than the others seemed to shift, then melt into the deeper blackness beside the structure. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was someone there? Or was it just the play of moonlight and shadow? The cat's reaction felt primal, certain. He struggled slightly in her arms, his golden eyes fixed on the barn with unnerving intensity, a silent demand. Go there. A cold dread, colder than the night air, washed over Sarah. That barn. She'd avoided it since arriving. Grandma Alara had always called it off limits, her voice taking on a strange, tight quality whenever young Sarah had asked about it. A vague image surfaced, a child's hand reaching for a rusted latch, a sharp reprimand, the scent of liniment suddenly strong, then nothing. The black cat squirmed more insistently, a soft, urgent mew escaping him. He wasn't leading her away from the potential danger near the barn. He was compelling her towards it. Why? What lay in that decaying structure that this mysterious, wounded creature, who only appeared under the full moon, needed her to see? The threads pulled tighter, threatening to unravel something long sealed. The shadow near the barn shifted again. Decision crystallized. Holding the trembling cat tighter, Sarah took a deep, steadying breath. The cottage, with its warm light and first aid kit, felt impossibly far away. The barn, with its secrets and the lurking shadow, loomed large. Driven by the cat's silent urgency and the violent tug of half-formed memories, Sarah turned her back on the safe path. Step by cautious step, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the cat's small body, she began to walk towards the dark, silent maw of the old barn. The moonlight felt suddenly cold, the garden path treacherous. What awaited her in the shadows? Who or what was watching from the darkness near the door? And what forgotten piece of her past was this midnight guardian trying to show her? The cat's purr had vanished entirely, replaced by a tense watchfulness. He stared fixedly. Ahead, a small, warm weight anchoring her to the terrifying, necessary path. The crunch of her boots on the frosty grass seemed deafening. 20 yards. 10. The barn door, warped and hanging slightly ajar on one hinge, revealed only impenetrable blackness within. 5 yards. Sarah paused, straining to see, to hear anything beyond the rush of blood in her ears. The shadow she thought she'd seen was gone. Or was it just deeper inside? The cat tensed, a low hiss escaping him, his gaze locked on the dark gap of the doorway. Sarah reached out a trembling hand, fingers brushing the cold, rough wood of the door. Taking a final shaky breath, she pushed it open just wide enough to slip through. The smell that hit her was overwhelming. Dust, decay, dry rot, and beneath it all that faint, persistent, memory-laden scent of old liniment. She stepped into the absolute darkness, the cat a silent, watchful presence in her arms. Moonlight sliced through the cracked roof in a single, dusty beam, illuminating swirling motes in the air. It fell directly onto something large and shrouded, in the center of the barn's dirt floor. A shape covered by a stained canvas tarp. The cat wriggled free, landing silently despite his injury. He limped determinedly towards the shrouded object, sat before it, and looked back at Sarah, his golden eyes glowing in the gloom like beacons. "Look," they seemed to say. "Remember." Her pulse roared. What was under that tarp? Tools? Old furniture? Something else? Something tied to the sharp reprimand, the forbidden latch, the scent that haunted her? She took a hesitant step forward, then another, her hand reaching out towards the edge of the dusty canvas. The air felt thick, charged. Just as her fingertips grazed the rough material, a deafening crack split the silence. Not from outside, but above. Sarah looked up in horror, a massive rotten beam, weakened by decades of neglect and illuminated. For a split second, by the shaft of moonlight, groaned, splintered, and plunged straight down from the decaying roof, right towards her and the cat. The world exploded in a thunderous roar of splintering wood and choking dust. Sarah didn't think. Pure instinct took over. She threw herself sideways, not away from the plummeting beam, but towards the small, dark shape of the cat, wrapping her body around him in a desperate shield. The impact was a physical shockwave. A deafening crash shook the earth beneath her, followed by an avalanche of smaller debris, shingles, splinters, decades of grime, raining down like a filthy, suffocating blanket. The force slammed her shoulder hard into the packed dirt floor, knocking the breath from her lungs. For a terrifying moment, there was only darkness, the taste of ancient dust thick on her tongue, and the frantic hammering of her own heart against the small, trembling creature she clutched protectively to her chest. Silence rushed in, thick and oppressive, broken only by her own ragged coughs and the frantic skittering of unseen creatures disturbed in the rafters. Moonlight, now filtered through the jagged hole torn in the roof, illuminated a scene of devastation. The massive beam lay diagonally across the barn floor, pinning one corner of the canvas-covered object and trapping a mountain of debris between. Sarah and the only exit. Dust motes danced wildly in the fractured light, creating an eerie, shifting haze. Panic clawed at her throat. They were buried alive in this tomb of forgotten things, the air already tasting stale and thick. She shifted, gingerly, testing her limbs. Pain flared in her shoulder, but nothing felt broken. Then she looked down. The black cat lay still in the crook of her arm, his golden eyes wide with shock, but fixed intently on her face. He let out a tiny, strained chirrup. "Are you okay?" "Oh, sweet boy, are you hurt?" Sarah whispered, her voice, raspy with dust and fear. She carefully examined him, her fingers probing gently through his fur. His injured paw seemed no worse, miraculously spared by their desperate lunge. Relief, sharp and dizzying, washed over her. He was alive. They were alive, but trapped. She tried to push herself up, only to dislodge a cascade of rotten wood and dirt that showered down onto them. The cat flinched, pressing closer to her warmth. The path to the door was completely blocked by the colossal beam and the debris pile it had created. Escape seemed impossible. Despair threatened to engulf her, colder than the night air seeping through the broken roof. Then the cat moved. He wriggled free from her loose hold, landing silently despite his limp. He didn't look at the blocked exit. Instead, his luminous gaze returned to the shrouded object, now partially exposed where the beam had pinned the canvas. He limped determinedly towards it, his small body radiating an urgency that cut through Sarah's panic. Remember. The word echoed in her mind, not heard but felt. He stopped beside the covered shape, sat down, and looked back at her, his golden eyes unwavering beacons in the gloom. Then, deliberately, he reached out one uninjured paw and hooked a single claw into the dusty canvas tarp. With a surprisingly strong tug for his size, he pulled it down just a few inches, revealing not tools or furniture, but the worn, dark-stained corner of an old wooden chest. The sight struck Sarah like a physical blow. That chest. She knew it. Not consciously, but deep in her bones, in the marrow of her forgotten childhood. A floodgate opened. The scent of liniment, always hovering at the edge of her perception, now slammed into her full force, mingling with the dust and decay. It wasn't just a smell, it was a portal. Suddenly, she wasn't a 30-year-old woman trapped in a collapsing barn. She was 5 years old, barefoot on cool grass, the summer sun warm on her back. She was running, laughing, chasing a blur of black fur, a tiny, playful kitten, towards the barn, the forbidden barn. Grandma Alara's voice, sharp with fear, rang out, "Sarah, no, stop!" But the kitten darted inside the slightly open door. Young Sarah followed, giggling, pushing the heavy door wider. Inside, it was dim and exciting. She saw the chest, tucked away. Curiosity pulled her. She reached for the latch, her small fingers fumbling. Click. She lifted the heavy lid, peering inside at treasures unseen in the shadows. Then, a terrifying scrape above her. She looked up. A loose shingle, disturbed by her entry or the wind, tore free from the roof. It wasn't a beam then, just a heavy piece of wood, but to a child it was a falling mountain. It struck her shoulder, knocking her down, a sharp, blinding pain. She screamed, and then Grandma was there, scooping her up, smelling of lavender and that sharp, comforting liniment, her voice trembling with relief and reprimand. "Oh, my brave girl, my silly, brave girl, I told you it was dangerous." The memory of the kitten vanished, overshadowed by the pain and the fear. Until now. Tears streamed down Sarah's dusty cheeks, hot and cleansing. "You," she breathed, staring at the black cat who sat patiently by the chest, watching her remember. "It was you. The kitten I chased. You led me in here. And then..." The lost. Peace snapped into place. The trauma, the forbidden barn, the scolding. It had buried the joyful beginning, finding the tiny black kitten hiding near the barn, their game of chase, the pure, innocent connection. Grandma, frantic to protect her from the dangerous structure, had inadvertently made the barn, and perhaps even the kitten, a source of fear and forgetting. The cat hadn't just appeared on full moons. He'd been waiting for them, waiting for her to be ready to remember. A fierce determination replaced the despair. They had to get out, not just for survival, but because this cat, this guardian of her lost past, deserved safety. He'd carried this memory for her, returning only when the moon was full, perhaps when the veil between past and present felt thinnest. She scanned the debris again, the cat's golden eyes tracking her gaze. The beam was immovable. The main door blocked, but the moonlight caught something else, a sliver of darkness near the back wall, behind the chest, partially obscured by fallen hay bales. A smaller door, or a gap in the rotting wood? The cat saw her looking. He gave a soft, encouraging marp and limped towards the back wall, nosing at the debris near the potential opening. Hope, fragile but bright, sparked. Okay, Sarah whispered, crawling carefully towards him, ignoring the protesting ache in her shoulder. Together they worked. Sarah pulled away smaller pieces of wood and tangled wire, her fingers bleeding from splinters, but fueled by adrenaline and the cat's unwavering presence. He couldn't help physically, but he stayed close, his warmth a constant reassurance. His watchful eyes seeming to guide her hands to the next obstacle. He'd nudge a loose piece of wood or let out a soft chirp when she paused, urging her on. It was a silent partnership forged in dust and desperation, a profound understanding, passing between woman and cat. His mission wasn't just to show her the chest. It was to help her survive the remembering. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, she cleared enough debris to reveal a low, narrow crawl space, perhaps once used for feeding animals, now a potential escape route. It led out under the barn wall into the dense thicket bordering the woods. It was tight, dark, and smelled of damp earth and animal musk. Fear prickled again. What was on the other side? The shadow she'd seen earlier? But the cat didn't hesitate. He looked at her, then at the opening, then back at her, his gaze steady. Trust me. He ducked his head and slipped into the darkness, his black form vanishing instantly. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath. Leaving the chest felt like leaving part of her rediscovered self, but the cat was her lifeline, literally and figuratively. She dropped to her stomach and began to wriggle through the cramped, earthy tunnel. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. Roots scraped her back. Cold mud soaked through her clothes. Panic threatened to close her throat. Then, a soft touch. The cat was there, just ahead, his cool nose briefly nudging her hand in the pitch. Black. He was guiding her. She focused on that tiny point of contact, pushing forward inch by agonizing inch. Cool night air suddenly brushed her face. Moonlight. She scrambled the last few feet, emerging gasping into the tangled thicket behind. The barn, the vast, star-studded sky, a breathtaking sight after the tomb-like darkness. The black cat sat a few feet away, patiently waiting, his fur silvered by the moon. He looked exhausted, but serene, his golden eyes reflecting the celestial light. The garden, the cottage, safety, lay just beyond the thicket. Relief, overwhelming, and sweet, flooded her. She crawled towards him, tears mixing with the dirt on her face. "You did it!" she choked out, reaching for him. He didn't move away. He stepped into her embrace, burying his head against her neck, his purr starting up again. A deep, resonant vibration that felt like the earth itself humming with contentment. She held him close, this miraculous creature, this bridge to her, past, this savior of her present. The shadow near the barn, it could have been anything, an animal, a trick of the light, the echo of an old fear. It didn't matter now. What mattered was the warm, purring weight in her arms and the reclaimed memory glowing softly in her heart. Back in the warm yellow light of the cottage kitchen, the world felt different, solid, real. Sarah carefully cleaned the cat's injured paw and shoulder wound, superficial thankfully, though the mud hid deep scratches. She offered food and water, which he accepted with quiet dignity, before settling onto a soft blanket she'd placed near the old fireplace. He watched her, those ancient golden eyes soft now, filled with a profound peace. Sarah didn't wait for the next full moon. The next day, armed with a sturdy flashlight and a crowbar borrowed from a neighbor after explaining a vague barn collapse, she returned to the wrecked structure in the clear light of day. Carefully, respectfully, she cleared the debris around the old wooden chest. It took effort, but the latch, rusted but intact, finally gave way. Inside, beneath a layer of moth-eaten blankets, lay treasures. A small hand-carved wooden cat, painted black with startlingly familiar gold dots for eyes. A child's drawing on brittle paper depicting a little girl and a black kitten playing near flowers. A bundle of letters tied with the exact same faded velvet ribbon she'd found in the fairy tale book. And tucked beneath it all, a photograph. A very young Sarah, beaming, holding a tiny, squirming jet-black kitten, while Grandma Alara smiled beside them, her hand resting protectively on Sarah's shoulder. The inscription on the back in Grandma's looping script, Sarah and Midnight, Summer of Joy. Midnight. His name was Midnight. The final piece clicked home, warm and whole. She brought the photograph and the carved cat back to the cottage. Midnight, curled on his blanket, lifted his head as she entered. He saw the carved cat in her hand. A low, soft trill vibrated in his throat, a sound of pure recognition. He stretched, then limped slowly towards her, rubbing his head against her leg, his purr resonating through the quiet room. He wasn't just a cat anymore. He was her cat. The kitten from the sunlit past, the guardian of the moonlit present, finally home. The adoption wasn't a grand gesture, but a quiet understanding that settled over the cottage like dust motes in a sunbeam. Sarah bought a plush bed, placed it near the fireplace where he liked to watch the flames. She stocked up on quality food and found a gentle vet who understood Midnight's unique journey. She framed the photograph of her younger self with Grandma and the tiny black kitten, placing it on the mantelpiece. Midnight would often sit before it, gazing at the image, his tail twitching softly. He still possessed an air of quiet mystery, often disappearing into the now safer corners of the garden during the day. But he always returned to the cottage as dusk fell. He no longer waited for the full moon to seek Sarah out. He was simply there, a warm, purring shadow in her life. One evening, weeks later, Sarah sat on the sofa, the repaired fairy tale book open on her lap, the faded velvet ribbon marking a page. Midnight jumped up beside her, circled once, and settled heavily against her thigh, his head resting on the book. He looked up at her, his golden eyes reflecting the lamplight, deep pools of contentment and something else. Gratitude? Understanding? Sarah stroked his sleek, jet-black fur, the rhythmic motion calming her own spirit as much as his. The scent of liniment was long gone, replaced by the warm, clean smell of home and cat. She picked up the ribbon. On a whim, she gently tied it into a loose bow around Midnight's neck. He didn't protest. He simply blinked slowly, a deep, rumbling purr starting in his chest, vibrating through her. It was a silent vow, a promise woven into silk and starlight fur. He wasn't a memory anymore. He was here, hers, and she was his. The lost piece of her heart hadn't just been found. It had been returned, warm, purring, and wrapped in the softest, darkest velvet night. The cottage, once filled with the ghosts of the past, now hummed with the quiet, profound peace of belonging. Midnight closed his eyes, his breathing deepening, into sleep against her leg. Sarah looked out the window at the rising crescent moon, a smile touching her lips. The moon would rise full again, bathing the garden in silver. But Sarah would never wait alone. She had her guardian, her memory keeper, her heart finally whole, curled safe and warm beside her, a living shadow stitched back into the fabric of her life with threads of moonlight and unconditional love.